So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, today I wanted to do something just a little bit different, as I came across an article that was titled 3 Bold Moves to Put the Detroit Lions in the Super Bowl Next Year. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting. I haven't read the article yet, but I did think it was pretty interesting, and I kind of wanted to take a look, kind of judge and grade what this person had to say about the Detroit Lions and talk about whether these would be good moves or even good strategies for the Detroit Lions to go after, even if the names themselves, as far as the players, aren't necessarily the exact right guys. So, with that being said, without any further ado, let's get right into it. So, 3 bold moves the Lions need to put them in the Super Bowl next year. Now, the Lions are going for the playoffs in 2023, real contender. Bold move, of course, Jalen Ramsey is on here. And that is the first move. Move number 3, trade for Rams cornerback Jalen Ramsey. Now, I don't know if it has any picks or any mock scenarios or anything like that, but just as far as the actual trading for Jalen Ramsey, I don't think it's necessarily the best idea for the Detroit Lions, and it really goes against everything the Detroit Lions have done so far in the way that they've built their football team, right? They haven't traded for big names. They haven't given out really big contracts, right? Obviously, they gave out one to Frank Ragnow. They gave out a decent-sized one to Romeo Okwara, but those are in-house guys who help build culture, to help, keep the homegrown talent home. And Jalen Ramsey isn't that. The Lions don't have a ton of cap space this year. If they cut Michael Brockers, if they cut a couple other guys, they could get roughly 30 to 40 million, and they would have enough to pay Jalen Ramsey's base salary of 17 million next year, 14 and a half next 2 years from now, and of course 15.5 in 2025. But the money is less of a concern, more of a culture fit, right? The Lions are building a culture. The Lions have built a culture over the last couple of years, and that culture doesn't include trading for big names. That culture doesn't really include giving out or paying big money to guys that haven't earned their way onto the team, guys that haven't done a lot for the Detroit Lions, and that's what Jalen Ramsey is. As far as being a talent, yes, Jalen Ramsey would very obviously make the Detroit Lions a better football team. Even coming off of a down year, I think there's an argument that Jalen Ramsey is a top 5 cornerback in the NFL. And I think going into next year, there's a legit argument that Jalen Ramsey could still be at the very top of the NFL when it comes to defensive backs and cornerback rankings. However, with that being said, the Rams would probably ask for quite a bit. Now, I wouldn't give up a first-round pick for Jalen Ramsey. I would assume if Jalen Ramsey gets moved with his age, with his contract, and with him coming off kind of a little bit of a down year, he would go for probably like a second and a fifth. I would assume something around that. Maybe a late first and a day 3 pick, but I wouldn't give up very much more than that for an aging cornerback that costs big money, that's coming off of a down year. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for the Detroit Lions. Would it make them a better football team on paper? Absolutely. Would it, be affordable? Absolutely. But as far as should they do it, I really don't think the Lions are in a position where they should, because they have the draft capital to go get a guy like Cam Smith, have the draft capital to go get a guy like Joey Porter. And if you're betting on one of those guys, right, obviously they're probably not going to be as good as Jalen Ramsey right off the bat, but they're going to be significantly cheaper. You're going to be able to mold and develop them the way you want them to play. And it's going to fit much more with the culture and style the Detroit Lions have been playing with, more so than what this would indicate, right? That's not trading for a big name. It's not giving up first round picks for big name players and big contracts. It's homegrown talent. It's drafting talent. And honestly, if I'm Brad Holmes, as a fan of the Detroit Lions, I would much rather put my faith in Brad Holmes to draft a franchise corner than trade for a cornerback with limited time left, because realistically, Jalen Ramsey probably has 2 or 3 more years of top level play, whereas Joey Porter or Cam Smith could realistically dominate the NFL for the next decade. So, the Lions are much more of a build for the future, a build for the long term, and Jalen Ramsey does not fit that in any way, shape, or form. And moving on to the second bold strategy, sign Tony Pollard. Now, this is one that I think is realistic, but not necessarily likely. And I say that more because I don't think that the Dallas Cowboys are going to let Tony Pollard walk out of the building. Dallas has a lot of money. Jerry Jones is not afraid to pay guys, right? And obviously the cap it is what it is, right? It's manipulable. It's not real in a sense that you can really get away with paying guys big contracts, even if on paper it might not seem like you have that kind of money. And I really don't think that Tony Pollard gets out of Dallas this season, because I think they're going to want to pay their most explosive and their best running back to stay on the team and potentially look to either cut, restructure, or move Ezekiel Elliott this offseason. Now, let's say hypothetically Tony Pollard does end up getting to free agency, right? Let's say hypothetically Tony Pollard is a free agent. He's asking for decent running back one money, right? Not 12, 15 a year, but we're talking like maybe 10, maybe $8 million a year for Tony Pollard. I still don't really know if Tony Pollard is the right guy for Detroit. Yes, he's explosive. Yes, he's a very good runner. And if the Lions get Tony Pollard, I genuinely think he would be the new RB1. And you could even potentially look at moving DeAndre Swift. But there is the problem. DeAndre Swift is still on the team. You still have to re-sign Jamal Williams, who broke the franchise rushing touchdown record last year. And you're not going to let that guy, that player, that talent, or that level of culture builder, that person, out of the building for Detroit. So you're already going to pay Jamal Williams probably decent running back money to stay in Detroit. You already have DeAndre Swift on a rookie contract. And this running back class in particular is loaded with really strong, powerful runners. Whereas I would not want to spend, let's just argue for argument's sake, right? Say you're going to pay Tony Pollard $10 million a year, $10 million a season to come be the running back in Detroit. I would much rather put that $10 million towards a defensive tackle. I would much rather put that towards a veteran linebacker or a veteran cornerback that could come in and really make a difference on the defense versus adding more explosiveness to an offense that was already explosive, already high scoring, and using that money and all that value on a position that honestly isn't that important for the Lions. If the Lions want to add running back this year, there's a ton of guys. Even with Blake Corum going back to school, Jamar Gibbs will be available on day 2 if you really, really want a running back with some speed. Or if you want to wait till day 3, Deuce Vaughn will be available. Kenny McIntosh from Georgia will be available. Chase Brown from Illinois will be available. There are literally probably 10 to 12 running backs that I think will be drafted this year, and probably 5 or 6 more in UDFA, mostly because the position is devalued. Those guys are going later in drafts. You can get a legit RB1 in day 2 of the draft. And if you want a guy with speed, if you want a guy with power, if you want a specialist, or if you want just a well-rounded running back, there are multiple guys that are going to go on day 3 that might not be as good as Tony Pollard, might not be as fast, as quick, as twitchy, but certainly will impact the Detroit Lions positively. And that guy could either take over for DeAndre Swift when his contract expires, be a third running back, be a change of pace running back. There are better options in free agency and better options as far as value at the running back position than Tony Pollard to the Detroit Lions. Now, if this happens, I'm not going to be upset, right? Because Tony Pollard would bring a explosive element to the running game. I think he would thrive behind this Detroit Lions offensive line. And I think that the Lions could have a really good rushing attack next year with DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams, and Tony Pollard. But you're already going to pay Williams big money. DeAndre Swift is already there. He's already shown he can be an explosive running back when he needs to be, and he's going to be the receiving option next season. So what is Tony Pollard's real role other than bringing a home run hitting ability that you can find on day 3 of the draft, or that wasn't really the biggest need as of right now anyway, because I'm not going to pay Tony Pollard $10 million just to be a home run hitter and just to potentially break off some big runs during the season. Unless an upgrade can be had, enter Pollard. Again, I don't think an upgrade is necessarily needed. I think that you could add more depth in day 3 of the draft. I think you could add a lot of things on day 3 of the draft. Tony Pollard, I think, will get big money, right? He was a 1,000-yard rusher. He had good yards per carry, had great yards per reception, had really good yards per touch, but he just isn't needed. I mean, Williams is good, Swift is good, even Justin Jackson last year was very, very good for the Detroit Lions. So paying all this money to another running back to come in and split carries just doesn't really make a ton of sense. And then moving on to pick number 1, I think we all kind of saw this coming. Lamar Jackson to the Detroit Lions. Now, I don't know what Lamar Jackson's future looks like with the Ravens. I don't know if they're going to re-sign him. I don't know if they're going to franchise tag him, if they're going to, just let him walk and give him that respect, if they're going to try to tag and trade him. There's a lot of different scenarios that the Ravens can do for Lamar Jackson. But I don't think one of them is going to come to Detroit because, again, this whole situation of let's make a huge major move, right? Let's play multiple first-round picks. Let's trade multiple first-round picks to go get a guy like Lamar Jackson, when I think, on paper, it's like, oh, you're getting a former unanimous MVP. Oh, you're getting a quarterback who's won an MVP, who's taken his team to the number 1 seed, who's won a few games in the playoffs, has that experience, is one of the most dynamic players in the NFL, and can absolutely take your team far in the playoffs. But you're not thinking about the more on the field issues, right? You're not thinking about how the Lions would have to revamp their entire offense to fit Lamar Jackson, how the Lions would really have to change most of their offensive structure to suit the quarterback position, on top of likely giving up 2 to 3 first-round picks for a veteran MVP quarterback that's on the right side of his 20s, right? It's just going to cost a lot of money. And with Jared Goff finishing the season as a top 10 quarterback, and really through the month of December and January was a top 5 statistical quarterback in the NFL, the need for Lamar Jackson isn't really necessary. Now, would Lamar Jackson be an upgrade at the quarterback position from a talent perspective? Yes. From a value perspective, I really don't know, because you'd be paying Lamar Jackson probably $40 million a year, which is a lot more than you're paying Jared Goff. Again, money that could go elsewhere, in which you're replacing a weakness, or in which you're replacing a strength, not a weakness. Jared Goff was not bad a season ago, had a very good season, and was a huge reason why the Lions won 9 games this year. So you'd be paying all this money, giving up all this draft capital to force your offensive coordinator, who just returned, to revamp the entire offense in the make of Lamar Jackson, just to replace a guy for the sake of replacement, not because that guy was a true weakness on your team. If the Lions are going to shell out $230 million over 4 to 5 years, they could spend that money and get a heck of a defense. I mean, they could sign so many defensive playmakers with that money, draft so many playmakers on the defensive side of the ball with that money. And if you, as the Detroit Lions, are saying, okay, we don't know if Jared Goff's our long-term solution, Lamar Jackson could be, so could Anthony Richardson, so could Will Levis, so could players next year, because next year's quarterback class is actually very, very strong at the quarterback position, with 2 guys who I had graded in the top 50 going back to school this year in Washington's Michael Penix, as well as LSU's Jalen Daniels. Both those guys are coming out, as well as, guys like, of course, as well as guys like Caleb Williams, Drake May, Spencer Sanders is a potential guy that just committed to Ole Miss that could potentially have a really good year. J.J. McCarthy potentially might come out, right? There's Quinn Ewers from Texas is really, really talented. There's so many quarterback options next year, especially, and even this year, if you really wanted to go get a young guy to mold and help grow into the offense. But to me, again, it doesn't make sense to invest all this money on the offense because the offense was top 5. The offense was not a problem this year. The defense was a true issue. So, if let's say the Lions go and they get Tony Pollard and they go trade for Lamar Jackson, they spend all this money on the offensive side of the ball, the defense is still kind of SOL because then there's no capital left to help the defense. There's no money left to help the defense. There's no draft picks left to get younger and talented on the defense. And the defense stays where it is. And yes, the defense finished incredibly strong and they were a big reason for the turnaround this year, but they still weren't very good. They still finished 28th as far as points allowed. They still finished bottom 5 in the NFL as far as overall defensive metrics. That team, as the Detroit Lions, they need defensive help. They need to add things on the defensive side of the ball. They need defensive tackle. They need cornerback. They need linebacker. They need safety. And they need stars on the defensive side of the ball because the stars on offense are already there. The stars on offense are already in place for the Detroit Lions. And yes, on paper, right, adding Lamar Jackson would make the Lions more explosive. Adding Tony Pollard can make the Lions more explosive. But giving up all these picks, giving up all this money for offensive players on an offense that was already top 5 in the NFL really just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So, with that being said, I guess that is kind of all we have for today. Those are 3 bold moves to put the Lions in the Super Bowl. Honestly, I don't think any of them should come true. And honestly, I don't think any of them will come true. In my honest opinion, I think the Lions are going to continue with the brand that they have. Cheap free agent signings, build through the draft, get talent, get value, BPA at almost every single pick that doesn't require you to go positional value, and build through the draft, right? That strategy took the Lions from 3-13-1 to 9-8. That strategy, as well as Ben Johnson returning, could potentially lead to a really, really successful season. But if you're giving up all these draft assets, all this capital, all this money to go, I'd say at this point, slightly upgrade the quarterback position or slightly upgrade the running back position, it really doesn't make a lot of sense because the Lions offense is Super Bowl caliber. The Lions defense, on the other hand, needs quite a bit of work. So with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below, what would you give up for these players? Would you want the Lions to potentially make a move for these guys? Would you want the Lions to not? If the Lions are going to make a big trade this season, in this offseason, I should say, who do you want the Lions to pick up? Is it a corner? Is it a linebacker? Is it a defensive lineman or a safety? Maybe it is on the offensive side of the ball, and you think the Lions really struggled somewhere that they could improve drastically in 2023. I'm very curious what you guys think. With all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.